I'm Amanda, a 32-year-old nurse, married to John for 5 years. We met in college when he was studying to be a doctor, and I was training to be a nurse. We started dating at a party, then got married. John is dedicated to becoming a doctor, but he's faced setbacks. He's failed his medical licensing exam twice and took 3 years off. Right now, he's working part-time and studying hard to pass, while I'm working full-time as a nurse to support us. He doesn't care about showing off wealth, like those who post photos of fancy cars online. Instead, he reads stories about people who lost loved ones to illness, keeps up with public health news, and studies Japan's healthcare system. I admire him because he genuinely wants to be a doctor to help people. Even though he's not a doctor yet and doesn't make much money, I've stayed by his side. John hasn't told his parents that he hasn't passed his exam yet. He says, "My mom's too nosy," and I reassure him, "I support you, so don't worry about them. This is just temporary." John works night shifts as a security guard at the hospital where I work. He has some medical knowledge from his studies, so he can talk like a doctor, and no one suspects he's still working toward his license. Even his family thinks he's a doctor because he sounds knowledgeable and is technically employed at the hospital. My mother-in-law, however, is harsh and very different from my husband. She has a strong personality and often looks down on me because I'm just a nurse. She thinks her son deserves someone better, maybe a beautiful doctor from dermatology. After she saw a pay stub, which actually wasn't mine, she made rude comments. She scoffed. Only earning $750 a month is like a college student's allowance. Even students working at bars make more. Having a low-income wife is a disgrace. Maybe you should divorce so our son can find a better wife. He's the ultimate triple threat. After all, her judgmental attitude makes it hard for me, but I choose to support John through his challenges, even though his mom doesn't think I'm good enough for him. Whenever my mother-in-law makes these rude comments, I just bow my head and apologize. I fully support my husband's goal of becoming a doctor, but at this point, he's only a high school graduate with a lot of medical knowledge, working part-time, not even a medical intern yet. Still, he's always genuinely grateful, often telling me, "Thank you for everything," so I continue to support him quietly. I'm busy with work, too, and even with both our incomes, we're barely managing financially, but I never cared much about money when I chose this career. I became a nurse because I admired Florence Nightingale and wanted to help people. Now, I work in internal medicine, one of the most demanding fields, and I don't think about money much. As long as we have enough to live, eat, and stay healthy, that's enough for me. Even though I'm supporting us both, covering his living expenses and school fees, my mother-in-law still brags to the neighbors, saying, "My son's a doctor and earns well." If he were already a real doctor, he wouldn't want her showing off about his income anyway. But she doesn't care, she just talks about money all the time. As her son, he has to put up with it silently. She has no idea that he's actually working as a security guard in a hospital uniform, not walking around in a white coat like she brags about. And even if he were, that's not something to go around gossiping about. I understand her pride, but she should keep it in check. I worry about my husband's mental health, as this pressure could hurt his chances of passing his medical exam. He's so close to becoming a doctor, and it would be sad if he had to spend his whole life as a security guard after working so hard. Honestly, he's well suited to being a doctor. He's thoughtful and kind. His only flaw might be his gentle nature. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law keeps going around making wild claims, saying things like, "My son makes $373,000 a year," knowing how false that is only adds more pressure on him. One time, I gently told my mother-in-law, "I think it might be better for his patients if you didn't talk so much about John's job. It could cause problems. After all, would you want to see a doctor whose mother is always bragging about him when you're sick?" She didn't care. She snapped back, "Shut up, you're just a nurse. You should be grateful you even got to marry a doctor. It's luckier than winning $3 million. Money can't buy status, you nursing school graduate." She often threw insults like that at me. I just replied politely, "Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me marry John. I respect him as a doctor and as a person, so please, just leave him alone." She scoffed, "You're so annoying. We can still make him divorce you and find someone better. It would be awful if our grandchild inherited your low IQ." Her words were beyond rude, almost a violation of my rights, but I stayed quiet. Compared to the importance of my job, helping patients, her mean comments seemed small, so I didn't take her seriously. Still, this attitude continued. And then one day, something unexpected happened. My in-laws live about 30 minutes away by train, so we don't visit much, and with my busy work schedule, I don't see them often. This distance helped keep up the lie that John is already a doctor, but for whatever reason, maybe she was bored or impatient, my mother-in-law suddenly showed up at our house unannounced. She looked around and sneered. What a cramped house. Why does my amazing son have to live in such a poor place? As she looked at a row of medical books on our shelf, she narrowed her eyes and muttered, "Well, he is my son after all," then snapped a photo with her phone. I felt a bit nervous because most of the books were for the national medical exam, including the ones for this year, which could give away that he's still a student. I felt my heart racing, but I did my best to stay calm and not let my mother-in-law see my anxiety. I apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, we're both very busy with work, so we haven't had time to look for a bigger place, especially lately." I hoped she'd take the hint to go home. Instead, she started going through our things. "What's with these cheap dishes?" she scoffed. "If you're a doctor, you should be buying Wedgwood." "Yes, I'm sorry," I replied, "they're from the dollar store." "Dollar store? I'm throwing these away," she said, ignoring me. I tried to explain that we were cutting costs on non-essentials like dishes, because we were putting our money toward John's textbooks and tuition. As long as the plates could serve food, that was good enough for us. Right now, passing the medical exam was our priority. Luckily, John was at work as a security guard at the hospital. I didn't want him to see this, so I hoped to get her out before he came back. But she didn't stop there. She went on to criticize everything. "These clothes look like a student's," she said, tossing out my husband's favorite shirts. "If you're a doctor, you should be wearing high-end brands." Then she found his watch. "This old thing? A doctor should have a luxury watch." She threw away his smartwatch, not realizing it was useful for his work. One by one, she tossed out his belongings, things he'd bought with the little money he had. Each item represented his hard work, his pride, and his dreams of becoming a doctor, but she didn't see that. Finally, she sneered, "This is what happens when you marry a poor girl. No wonder you live like this, even though he's a doctor." My mother-in-law looked around and sneered, "It's shocking you don't live in a luxury apartment. I was hoping we could go shopping, and maybe you'd at least buy me a designer bag." Her expectation was outrageous, so I tried to gently clarify the reality of our life. "Mother-in-law," I said, "I don't mean to be forward, but he's not extravagant. We actually like our simple lifestyle." But she didn't care. "You're so annoying. Do you know how hard he worked to get into medical school? We've been waiting to get back what we spent on his education, and it's your fault that we're still waiting." She kept getting angrier, rummaging through every part of our home, tossing out anything she thought was too cheap. Then she opened some clear cases where we kept our utility bills, mail, and other documents. That's when she found the pay stubs. They showed $750.25, clearly marked with my husband's name. Either she didn't notice or didn't read carefully, but she started yelling. $750? Are you kidding me?" she shrieked. "A nurse making only $750? That's not what a doctor should be earning. Even an anesthesiologist makes that in a day, and you call yourself a nurse? What a joke, you must barely be working." She spiraled into anger, accusing me of living off my husband's money, deceiving him, and being a part-time nurse just for show. In reality, that $750 was what he earned from his shifts as a security guard, working in the gaps between studying, enduring tough shifts, while watching younger doctors pass him by. It wasn't a lot, but every bit helped us get by. But my mother-in-law didn't stop. Her anger only grew until she finally shouted, "You're a bad luck wife. Get divorced already." Just then, the front door opened. My husband had come home from his shift. He froze when he saw his favorite clothes and his watch, tossed carelessly into a trash bag. My husband quietly began picking up his belongings that had been thrown into the trash, one by one, but my mother-in-law interrupted him. "John, I don't mean to be harsh, but you need to divorce this wife of yours. With your high education, high income, and nearly 6 foot height, why did you choose such a pathetic woman? She only earns $750. He stayed silent, his lips tightly pressed, not showing what he was feeling. My mother-in-law continued, "I'll bring the divorce papers. Leave this dusty little place and this woman who smells like disinfectant, and find a better wife. You're a doctor, after all." Finally, my husband stood up and spoke. "Mom, I've been quiet about this, but I'm not a doctor yet." She was stunned. "What are you talking about?" He explained, "I'm sorry for hiding it, but I haven't passed the national exam yet. And that $750 on the pay stub, That's my part-time job salary. My mother-in-law looked shocked and turned to me in confusion. What is he talking about? Isn't that your pay? I saw there was no point in hiding anymore. No, it's not mine, I said. He continued, it's true. I failed the national exam twice, and I've been working as a security guard. My mother-in-law, stunned by the revelation, suddenly became unsteady. As she backed up, she slipped on some newspapers she'd scattered while going through our things and fell. She didn't hit her head, but she did put out her arm to catch herself, and we heard a snap. It was a fracture. My husband and I quickly treated her and took her to the hospital. Once she was settled with an orthopedic doctor, my husband told her, Mom, I'm sorry, but please don't come to our house anymore, and don't think of me as your son anymore. She was shocked, but he continued, I tolerated your bragging, even felt guilty for lying, but insulting the money I worked hard to earn was too much. I'm not studying to brag about a salary. We have very different values, and it's best we cut ties. My mother-in-law, whose main purpose in life had been boasting about her doctor son, was devastated. Since then, she's mostly stayed home, embarrassed to face the neighbors. Later that year, my husband passed the medical licensing exam. Though he was a bit older than the usual resident physician, he finally started working as a doctor. He worked with kindness, even bringing tea to the security guards. Our life became peaceful and happy. If my mother-in-law had just waited a few more months, she would have seen him in his white coat, fulfilling her dream, but she brought her troubles upon herself.